The pendulum swayed slowly, right, then left, pausing in the middle for just a heartbeat before ticking forward again. That gentle movement, so familiar and steady, pulled me back into focus. I adjusted my seat and shifted my eyes to the scattered parts of the clock mechanism lying across my work table. Brass gears, tightly wound springs, delicate levers, each one a small part of something far greater. Each tiny piece had its place, and together they created a beautiful, ticking symphony when restored just right. I leaned closer, my hands careful and sure, even after 68 long years of living. Time may have added lines to my face and silver to my hair, but it hadn't stolen the steadiness from my hands or the sharpness from my vision. Especially not when I was looking through the old magnifying glass clamped to the tripod in front of me, a trusted tool that had been with me for years. With quiet concentration, I picked up a tiny gear between my fingers, its teeth worn but still strong, and gently set it into its place inside the clock's heart. I always felt a quiet kind of joy in these moments, bringing life back into something others had long given up on. The workshop was built at the front of my modest home, a one-story house tucked along a peaceful street in Winston-Salem. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. After retiring from decades of work as an insurance appraiser, I found myself needing more than just rest. So I turned to something I'd always loved, fixing antique clocks. It wasn't a booming business, but it gave me something I valued more: focus, peace, and the satisfying feeling of making broken things whole again. Just then, the doorbell rang, a soft chime I'd heard 1,000 times. I looked up, wiping my hands on the old cloth by my side. In the doorway stood Mrs. Lawrence, a familiar face from a few blocks away. Her back was slightly hunched, her steps careful as she weaved through the forest of ticking clocks. "Mr. Broom," she called gently. "Are they ready?" "Almost there, Mrs. Lawrence," I said, giving her a reassuring nod. "Just need to adjust the movement. They'll be ready for tonight." She smiled, and I noticed again how her teeth looked too perfect, almost certainly dentures. "This clock belonged to my grandmother," she said softly. "It stopped 15 years ago, and no one could fix it. It's a beautiful piece," I said, turning back to the delicate mechanism. Late 19th century Swiss movement, made with real care. These were built to last. "Not like the junk we get today," she muttered with a shake of her head. "My granddaughter's husband gave me a fancy-looking watch last Christmas. Stopped working after 3 months. I chuckled faintly, still working with quiet focus. "Come back at 6. It'll be ready." With that, she nodded and shuffled out. I returned to my bench, picking up where I'd left off. In here, time didn't move the same way as it did outside. There was a certain stillness in the workshop, a sense of calm that lived between the steady rhythm of dozens of ticking clocks. It was as though they all breathed together, like a heartbeat for the room. Sometimes I imagined I could feel time itself humming in the walls. Then came a sharp buzz. My phone rang, an outdated little thing I kept in my pocket more out of habit than need. The ring cut through the soft ticking, almost jarring. I hesitated before answering. "Hunter Broom here," I said into the receiver. "Dad." "It's Shirley," came the voice on the other end, clear, brisk, and unmistakable. Something tightened in my chest. "Shirley, my daughter, rarely called. Unless something was needed. I'm calling about your birthday," she said, sounding more like a secretary scheduling an appointment than a daughter. "Norman and I are hosting a dinner for you next Saturday at 6. Nothing fancy, just family." I paused. My birthdays in recent years had mostly passed in silence, maybe a polite phone call if that. This offer came out of nowhere. It didn't. "Sit right. That's thoughtful," I said carefully. "Some friends will be there," Shirley went on. "And Veronica, too. She's off from school this week, Veronica. My granddaughter. I hardly saw her. Maybe once a year, and even then she barely looked up from her phone. Last Christmas, she'd come over and said less than a dozen words. "I'll be there," I said, unsure of my own voice. "Thank you." "Okay," she said quickly, like she was checking something off her list. "See you Saturday." The line went dead. I lowered the phone and stared at the old wall clock above my bench. My mind spun with questions. Was this genuine? Was there a reason behind the sudden invitation? A strange feeling settled beneath my ribs. Not quite hope, not quite dread. Maybe a bit of both. A knock pulled me from my thoughts. This time it was Alvin Thatcher, my neighbor and one of the few people I truly considered a friend. "Fix my lawnmower's brains," he grumbled as he stepped inside and dropped into the creaky wooden chair across from me. "Third time it's broken this month." "You just don't know how to treat it right," I said, trying to sound amused as I turned back to Mrs. Lawrence's clock. Alvin had once been a history teacher, now retired like me. We bonded over our shared love of old things. His treasures were books, mine were clocks. Still, we understood each other. "You look tense," he said after a moment, watching my hands. "Something happen?" I told him about Shirley's call. He knew the story, knew the distance that had grown between me and my daughter over the years. "What do you think?" I asked when I finished. He raised an eyebrow. "You really believe she just wants to be nice?" I leaned back in my chair, tools now resting idle on the table. "I want to believe it," I admitted quietly, and just like that, the memories came flooding back. Shirley as a little girl, laughing wildly, always climbing into my lap for stories. How proud she was when I taught her to ride a bike. How we used to take weekend trips to the park, Catherine and I walking hand in hand while Shirley ran ahead with wind in her hair. Then Catherine got sick. The cancer hit fast, and the months between diagnosis and the funeral were nothing short of a nightmare. Shirley had just started college. She was 18, and after her mother passed, something between us shattered. I threw myself into work, too broken to talk. And Shirley, she distanced herself, rarely coming home, always keeping busy. She met Norman a year later. Confident, proud, and from a wealthy family. From the moment he met me, he looked at me with quiet disapproval, as if I wasn't good. Enough for their world. Their wedding came a year after she graduated. I was barely included. Norman's parents shone at the center of attention while I sat quietly at the side. It was clear then. Shirley was ashamed of where she came from. As time passed, the distance only grew. They moved to a big home in a polished neighborhood, had Veronica, and built a new life. I tried to keep up, to stay part of it, but our conversations became shallow, brief, and cold. "Hey, Hunter, where the hell are you?" Alvin's voice snapped me back to the present. "Sorry," I said, rubbing my eyes. "I was thinking." I rubbed my temples. "You know, the last time Shirley invited me to a family dinner was 3 years ago, and that was only because her mother-in-law was coming and Norman needed to make it look like a family." Alvin shook his head. "You think too much. Go drink their wine. Eat their food. Accept congratulations. It won't be any worse. You're probably right." I agreed, though a worm of doubt continued to gnaw at me. "Lydia has been asking about you." Alvin changed the subject abruptly. "She said she saw you at the store last week, but you were so absorbed in your own thoughts that you didn't notice her greeting." Lydia, Alvin's daughter, worked as an editor at the local newspaper. Unlike Shirley, she maintained a warm relationship with her father and visited him often. "Tell Harry apologize," I said. "I've really been going off on myself a lot lately." "She's going to stop by this weekend." Alvin stood up. "Maybe stop by for dinner. Lydia is making a lasagna that can raceth dead." I smiled. "Maybe I will." After Alvin left, I went back to work, but my thoughts kept coming back to the upcoming birthday party. Part of me hoped it was a sincere gesture, Shirley's attempt to mend the relationship. But the other part, more cynical and learned from years of disappointment, suspected she had some ulterior motive. At 6 o'clock, Mrs. Lawrence came in to pick up her watch. Her delight when she heard the familiar ticking sound reminded me why I love my job. There is something deeply satisfying about bringing life back to mechanisms that were thought to be hopelessly broken. In the evening, sitting in an armchair with a cup of tea, I reflected on my life. About the clocks I had repaired over the years, about the people who have come and gone, about the way time flows inexorably and inevitably taking opportunities and hopes with it. My phone beeped, announcing an incoming message. I reluctantly picked it up. The message was from Shirley. Don't forget Saturday 6 p.m. formal attire encouraged formal wear. So it's not just a family dinner. There'll be guests, probably Normans. Co-workers or Shirley's co-workers, people my daughter wants to look a certain way in front of. I put the phone away without answering. The unexpected birthday invitation, which had given me mixed feelings an hour ago, now seemed increasingly suspicious. But I decided to go. After all, it was a chance to see my granddaughter and maybe really begin to repair my relationship with my daughter. With that thought, he went to bed, trying not to think that the invitation might not have been motivated by concern, but by some other less pleasant motive. Saturday morning was clear but cool. I woke up early out of habit. Years of work had developed an internal clock that rang at 6 o'clock in the morning, regardless of the day of the week. After lying there for a few minutes, listening to the ticking, a fuel clock, I got up and headed for the kitchen. My morning ritual remained threesome: coffee, peanut butter toast, in the newspaper. Although the newspaper had long since been replaced by a tablet, even in our small town, the paper press was retreating under the onslaught of digital technology. Flipping through the local news, it thought about the evening ahead. My birthday, 68. Years old. When I was younger, I envisioned these years differently. I saw myself surrounded by a loving family and a house full of children's voices and laughter. But fate had its way. Catherine had left too soon. Shirley was estranged, and my granddaughter Veronica was almost a stranger to me. I set the clipboard aside and went to the bathroom. The mirror reflected a face I still hardly recognized, the wrinkles around my eyes, the gray that had long since supplanted all other colors, the posture no longer as straight as it used to be. But the eyes remained. The same, gray-blue, attentive. The eyes of a watch macro accustomed to noticing the smallest details. After taking a shower, I started shaving. I usually did it every other day, but today was a special occasion. The blade glided gently over me skin, removing the gray stubble. The cologne I used was the same one I'd used 30 years ago, the classic scent Catherine had given me for our first anniversary. Then came the question of clothing. Shirley had mentioned formal wear, which translated to her meant a suit at the very least. I opened my closet and surveyed my meager closet. I had 2 suits. The black one I'd worn to the funeral and the dark blue one I bought a few years ago for my nephew Alvin's wedding. I chose the blue one, but when I took it out, I found there was a small stain on the lapel that hadn't been there before. Could be moths or just the effects of long storage. I had to go to the city to buy a new one. The men's clothing store on Main Street was one of the few that still resisted the onslaught of shopping centers. The owner, Mr. Webb, had known for years. "Hunter," he exclaimed as I entered, "what are you doing here?" "The last time you bought something here. Let me guess, 3 years ago." "Hello, George." I shook his hand. "I need a suit. Something conservative, but not funeral-ish." Mr. Webb gave me a professional look. "What's the occasion?" "A birthday party. My daughter invited me." "Oh, that's great." He rubbed his hands together with a spark of enthusiasm. "I've got a few ideas that might really suit you," he said confidently. And so began the next hour of trying on different suits, each with its own feel and fit. After slipping into several options, I finally settled on a dark gray suit. Mr. Webb, with his keen eye, assured me it didn't make me look older, but instead highlighted a sense of stability. I wasn't sure if, at my age, you could still care about whether clothes aged you, but I figured if anyone knew, it was him. Once the suit was chosen, Mr. Webb clapped his hands. "Now, you need a tie," he announced. "Do you have one that'll match this?" I thought about the ties gathering dust in my closet, outdated, worn out, and certainly not chosen with this event in mind. "Probably not," I admitted. Without missing a beat, Mr. Webb led me to a long rack filled with colorful, crisp ties. I didn't want anything loud or flashy, just something subtle that would still stand out. After browsing for a while, I picked a deep blue tie with a soft, elegant pattern. It was more expensive than what I usually paid for accessories, but today felt like a day to make exceptions. "Excellent choice," Mr. Webb nodded approvingly. "Your daughter will definitely be impressed." I doubted Shirley would notice the tie at all, but I didn't say anything. After settling the bill, I left the store and headed toward the ATM. I needed to take out money for a gift. Choosing a gift for Shirley wasn't easy anymore. Once, I could have picked something personal, but now, she felt like someone I barely knew. After thinking it through, I decided on cash. It felt practical and, more importantly, free of emotional expectations. I withdrew $300, enough to show thoughtfulness, but not so much that it looked like I was trying to buy affection. On my way back, I stopped by a small newsstand and picked up a plain white envelope. With some time to spare, I entered a nearby cafe and found a table by the window. I ordered a sandwich and a cup of coffee. As I ate, I watched the world go by outside. Winston-Salem had changed so much over the years. Buildings I used to walk past were gone now, replaced by glass storefronts and towering offices. New places had sprung up: cafes, bookstores, boutiques. The city had kept moving forward, but I felt like an antique clock I'd repaired, something from another time. Still running, but out of place. Then I heard my name. "Mr. Broom? Hunter Broom?" I turned to see a woman in her 30s or 40s with short brown hair and warm, alert eyes. It was Lydia Alvin's daughter. "Have a seat if you've got a moment," I said. She smiled and took the chair across from me. "Dad said you were supposed to come for dinner, but you never made it," she said. "Got caught up with some repairs," I replied. I took a sip of coffee. "How's the newspaper?" She shrugged. "Same old struggle trying to keep up with online media. But I did see your clocks at the museum. They were amazing." A small warmth lit in my chest. "Thanks. It's good to know someone notices." "I bet your daughter's really proud of your work," she said kindly. I chuckled. "Shirley thinks clocks are a waste of my time. She wants me to sell the house and move into a care facility." Lydia frowned. "That's really unfair. You're preserving pieces of history. Not everyone gets that." I nodded. To most, a clock's just a machine to tell time. They don't see the art in the mechanism or the story in every gear. We talked a bit longer. She told me about a project she was launching for the paper, a series about locals with deep roots in the city. "You should be one of them," she said. "You've got stories worth telling." I smiled politely. "I'm not sure my life's as exciting as you imagine. But if you're ever short on subjects, you know where to find me." When Lydia left, I felt oddly touched. It was nice that someone appreciated what I did, someone who wasn't obligated to. And at the same time, it stung that my own daughter didn't feel the same. At home, I placed the money into the white envelope and sealed it tight. No card, no message. Just a simple offering from a father who no longer shared much with his child. The rest of the day passed with small tasks, repairing a clock a customer had dropped off, tidying my workbench, paying bills online. I kept checking the time. As evening drew near, I felt the weight of anticipation settle over me. At 5 o'clock sharp, I began getting ready. I showered again, shaved carefully, and dressed in the new suit and tie. Looking into the mirror, I tried to imagine how Shirley would see me. Probably as just an old man doing his best to fit into a world that wasn't made for him anymore. I tucked the envelope into my inside jacket pocket and headed out, driving my old but well-kept Ford across town. Shirley's neighborhood was a world away from mine-wide streets, lush trees, manicured lawns. Doctors, lawyers, and business executives lived here. It had always felt like unfamiliar territory when I reached her house, a stately two-story with tall columns and bright windows. I parked out front and stayed in the car for a moment, just breathing. The lights were on. Several cars were already in the driveway. I imagined the party in full swing. Laughter, clinking glasses, stylish conversation, and I thought back to the little girl who once ran to me with scraped knees, who beamed as I taught her to ride a bike, who brought home school awards with pride. Where had she gone? When did she turn into someone ashamed of where she came from? Maybe I'd failed her, or maybe it was just time doing what it does best, changing everything and everyone. I finally stepped out of the car. The air was cool and smelled faintly of flowers. A dog barked somewhere nearby. I walked up the porch steps and paused. Taking a deep breath. I pressed the doorbell. Inside, I could hear laughter and voices. I straightened my jacket, adjusted my tie, and braced myself to enter Shirley's world, a place I never truly belonged. The door opened. Standing there was Shirley, elegant in a black dress, her hair styled neatly and dyed a lighter shade. "Daddy," she said, giving me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're right on time. Happy birthday." I stepped forward, awkwardly, not knowing whether to hug her or limit myself to a handshake. Shirley settled the matter by lightly touching my cheek, an imitation kiss that didn't require real intimacy. "Come on in," she stepped aside. "Everyone's already here." I entered the spacious hallway decorated in a modern style. Lots of light, minimal furniture, abstract paintings on the walls. There were voices and clinking glasses coming from the living room. "Your present?" Shirley nodded at my inside pocket where the edge of an envelope peeked out. "Yes." I pulled it out and handed it to her. It was nothing special. She took it without opening it and put it on the table in the hall. "Thank you," she said without enthusiasm. "Come on, I'll introduce you to the guests." As I followed my daughter into the living room, I felt my back muscles tense. The evening ahead promised to be long and challenging. There were about 15 people in the living room, Shirley and Norman's coworkers, their friends. They stood in groups with glasses of wine and cocktails, engaged in lively conversations. The conversations did stop when we arrived. Only a few people cast curious glances in my direction. Norman, a tall man with thinning hair and an impeccably trimmed beard, approached us, holding a glass of whiskey. "Ah, father-in-law," he held out his hand. "Glad you could make it." His handshake was firm but cold. Norman always treated me with barely concealed superstition. "I'm glad too," I said, trying to sound sincere. "Would you like a drink? Whiskey? Wine?" "Whis, please. No ice." While Norman went to the bar, Shirley began to introduce me to the guests. I nodded, shook hands, exchanged pleasantries. But the names and faces blended into one blurred image. None of these people were interested in getting to know me. To them, I was just Shirley's old father, a detail of fine interior that politeness demanded to be noticed. "There's my favorite granddaughter." It cheered when I saw Veronica coming down the stairs, a tall, slender girl with blonde-colored hair. She was wearing a fancy dress that probably cost more than my entire closet. In her hand, she held a cell phone, the invariable accessory of today's youth. "Hi, Grandpa." She walked over and allowed herself to be hugged, though I could feel her body tense from the contact. "Happy birthday, Dot. Thank you, darling." I pulled back, looking her over. "You've grown so much. How's school going?" "It's okay," she shrugged. "Nothing special." Veronica went to a prestigious college on the East Coast. I had no idea what she was studying. Our conversations rarely went beyond superficial questions about weather and health. "Verona, honey," Shirley interjected, using her daughter's pet nickname. "Help me with the appetizers." They retreated to the kitchen, leaving Malone among strangers. Norman returned with a glass of whiskey and handed it to me. "Make yourself comfortable," he said. "Dinner will be in half an hour." With these words, he walked away to a group of men discussing something by the fireplace. I took a sip of whiskey and looked around. The living room was tasteful but impersonal, like a page from an interior design magazine. Nothing personalized. Nothing that told me anything about the people who lived here. Even the family photos on the mantelpiece looked like stage shots from an advertisement for Happy Family Life. I noticed that I wasn't in those pictures. Shirley, Norman, Veronica, a perfect family of three with no hint of the existence of a grandfather or other relatives. This discovery didn't surprise me, but it still prickled. I had been erased from the family history, turned invisible. Perhaps that's White Knight's invitation seemed so suspicious. It seemed out of character with my invisibility. With glass in hand, I walked to the window, looking out at the neatly trimmed lawn and ornamental bushes. It was evening, and in the thickening dusk the house seemed an island of light and warmth. But I felt more alien here than outside. Dinner was served in the dining room, a spacious room with a long dining table that never seemed to be used for ordinary family meals. The white oblacloth, silverware, crystal glasses, everything looked like a set for Flamingan advertisement for the perfect life. The guests were seated according to name cards placed on the table. I found my place at the far end of the table, almost at the door to the kitchen, a symbolic distance from the center of the event where Shirley and Norman were seated. Now Mr. Broom, the middle-aged woman sitting to my right, addressed me. "Shirley told me you were a watchmaker." She said the word watchmaker as if she were talking about something exotic and slightly ridiculous. "I restore antique clocks," I answered, cutting off a piece of steak. "It's a hobby and a small business at the same time." "How interesting," she said without a trace of interest in her voice. "It must be soothing." More like it requests concentration and patience. I tried to engage her in a real conversation. Some mechanisms are over 100 years old, and each has its own peculiarities, of course. Of course, she was clearly looking for a way to change the subject. "How long have you lived in Winston-Salem?" "All my life." The conversation continued in the same vein. Superficial questions and equally superficial answers. I noticed that the other guests were talking animatedly, laughing, sharing stories. Norman was saying something, gesticulating vigorously, and his listeners burst into loud laughter. Shirley sat nearby, elegant and confident, occasionally adding her own comments, which were also met with applause of approval. Veronica sat a few seats away from me, more immersed in her phone than in what was happening at the table. Occasionally, she would look up to laugh at another joke from her father or answer a question from one of the guests, but then return to the screen. The food was exquisite, but tasteless to me. I chewed mechanically. Drinking Winnethet in any other situation would have been excellent. Here it seemed to be part of the scenery, expensive toimpris, but it did not evoke any emotion. After the main course, dessert was served. Some elaborate French cake, the name of which I couldn't hear. Shirley rose from her seat, holding a glass of champagne. "Friends," she began with a smile, looking around at the crowd. "Thank you for sharing this evening with us. As you know, today is Avery's special day, my father's birthday." All eyes turned to me, and I felt like an object in a museum, something to be looked at with curiosity, but no real interest. "Dad's turning 68, Shirley continued, "and we wanted to celebrate with some close friends." I looked at my daughter, trying to catch the sincerity in her words, but her speech sounded stilted, as if she'd practiced it in front of a mirror. "Please raise a glass to my father." Shirley raised her glass to his health and long life. "Cheers." The guests joined in raising their glasses. I nodded and took a sip. I had a strange feeling that there was something insincere in that toast, as if there was another meaning behind it. And now, Shirley put her glass on the table. The most exciting moment of the evening, the presents. Norman got up and left the room, returning a minute later with a large box wrapped in brightly colored gift paper. Veronica suddenly perked up, put the phone away, and straightened in her chair as if preparing for something important. Daddy Shirley pointed to the seat next to her. "Please join us." I got up and walked over to her, feeling the stares of everyone present. A strange tension hung in the air, as if everyone was waiting for some kind of performance. "Before we give you our gift," Shirley said, "why don't you give us yours?" I pulled an envelope from my inside jacket pocket and handed it to her. Shirley took it and, without opening it, handed it to Norman, who put it on the table. "Thank you, Daddy," she said with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "And now our present. We thought long and hard about what to get you and decided this would be the most appropriate." Norman solemnly handed me the box. It was unexpectedly light, almost weightless. I carefully unwrapped the gift paper, feeling the tension building around me. Veronica suddenly rose from her seat and moved closer, holding her phone in front of her, clearly filming what was happening. Removing the paper, I found a plain cardboard box with a lid. Under the stares of everyone present, I opened it. The box was empty. I looked inside, expecting to see something at the bottom. Maybe a small object or a note, but there was really nothing there. There was a silence that lasted only a few seconds, but seemed like an eternity to me. And then Shirley and Norman laughed loudly with a kind of evil mirth. "Surprise!" Shirley exclaimed. "It's the perfect gift for you, Dad." "I don't understand," I said, still staring at the empty box. "It's very simple," Norman smirked. "You and the box are the same thing. There's something on the outside and nothing inside." The laughter grew louder. Shirley and Norman were rejoined by some of the guests, though I could see the embarrassment and awkwardness on the faces of others. Empty. Shirley said, looking me straight in the eye, "All your life you've been anything for Mom, for me, for everyone." I stood holding the empty box and felt something shatter inside. Not pain. Pain requires surprise. It was more like a confirmation of my worst fears. The final proof of what I'd been guessing all these years. Veronica kept filming, moving around us to capture my reaction from different angles. Her face lit up with excitement as if she was filming the climactic scene of a movie. "This is going to be a viral video, Grandpa," she said with a smile. "An old man gets an empty box for his birthday. His reaction is priceless." Some guests looked frankly embarrassed. Others tried to hide their awkwardness behind artificial smiles, but no one intervened. No one said it was unacceptable. "You've always been a nobody," Shirley continued, clearly getting the hang of it. "A petty insurance agent who never amounted to anything. Mom deserved better. I deserved better." "Do you know why we invited you here tonight?" Norman asked. Shirley wanted to finally express everything that had accumulated over the years to close this chapter. I wasn't, looking at my daughter and trying to see in her face the little girl I had once cradled in my arms. Butte in front of me was a strange woman with cold eyes and a cruel smile. "Don't you have anything to say?" Shirley grinned. "Of course you have nothing to say. You always kept silent when you had to speak. Always backed down when you had to fight." I carefully placed the empty box on the table. My hands didn't shake. My voice was calm when I finally spoke. "I accept your gift, Shirley, and thank you for dinner." It was clearly not the reaction they'd hoped for. Shirley frowned, irritation flashing in her eyes. "That's it?" she asked. "Nothing you want to say in your defense?" "Whatever I say, you've already decided who I am," I replied. "You're entitled to your opinion." Veronica looked disappointed. "Come on, Grandpa," she said. "Get angry, cry. Do something interesting for the video." I looked at me granddaughter, her young face contorted with a strange mixture of frustration and excitement. Something clenched inside at the thought of my blood, my flesh and blood, filming my humiliation for the entertainment of strangers. "I'm sorry to disappoint you, Veronica," I said. "You might want to find someone more emotional for your videos." My voice was calm, but inside I was trembling. I turned to face the guests. Some shifted in their seats, others looked down at their plates. A few pretended to be interested in the decor or their drinks, doing anything to avoid meeting my eyes. The silence was heavy. Not a single person stood up for me, not even out of simple decency. "Thank you all for your time. Enjoy the rest of your evening," I said, as gently as I could. I didn't want to make a scene. I didn't want to be like them. Without waiting for any kind of response, I turned and began walking toward the hallway. The sound of my own footsteps seemed louder than usual, echoing in the awkward silence of the room I just left. Then came Shirley's voice, sharp and cold, cutting through the air like a knife. "See? That's exactly what he always does. Just walks away the moment things get hard. That's been his whole life, running from everything." I didn't look back. I didn't answer. There was nothing more to say. I reached the hallway, took my coat from the rack, and slipped it on slowly. The quiet click of the front door closing behind me felt like the final note in a song I never wanted to hear again. Outside, the air felt crisp and clean like the first breath after escaping a suffocating room. I stopped for a moment, filling my lungs with it, letting it cool my burning chest. Overhead, the stars had begun to shine, tiny silver points scattered across a dark velvet sky. The moon hung low and heavy, glowing a soft yellow like a watchful eye in the night. I walked slowly toward my car, parked beneath a street lamp. Each step felt heavy, like I was carrying something invisible but crushing. My mind was full, swirling with thoughts I couldn't make sense of. My feelings were tangled, twisted into knots I didn't know how to loosen. Yes, I was hurting. But it wasn't just embarrassment or public shame. It was something deeper, heavier. It was the ache of knowing something had truly ended, a bond that could never be repaired. A relationship lost, not by accident, but by choice. Once I sat in my car, I didn't turn the key. I just stared ahead, the house still glowing behind me. From where I sat, I could see the dining room lit up, the shapes of people still moving. Inside, were they still talking about me? Or had they already forgotten I was there at all? Was I now just a short, awkward memory in an otherwise enjoyable evening? I thought of Shirley again, her face when she'd said those awful words. There wasn't hate in her eyes. No, hate I could have understood. But what I saw was something else. Something colder. It was satisfaction, like someone checking off the final item on a list they'd been waiting years to complete. What had I done to earn that? Where did I fail her so badly that she needed to punish me like this? After Catherine passed, I admit, I drifted. I buried myself in work, in quiet, in books. I didn't know how to show grief in the way others expected. Maybe Shirley saw that as abandonment. Maybe my silence looked like I didn't care. But even so, did that justify what you did tonight? A public scene, recorded, uploaded for the internet to watch and judge? It wasn't just a rejection. It was a performance. I finally started the engine and pulled away from the curb, the house shrinking behind me as I drove through the night. The city passed by like a blur, lights and buildings melting together. None of it registered. I was on autopilot, just trying to get home. When I parked and stepped inside, I didn't bother turning on the lights. The quiet of my own house welcomed me. It was just after 10. Strange how 2 hours could stretch and feel like an entire lifetime. Took off my jacket and loosened my tie. Then I dropped into my old chair, exhausted in a way that went beyond the physical. The room was filled with the soft ticking of clocks, dozens of them, all clicking out the time in rhythm. Normally, that sound comforted me. Tonight, it felt like a cruel joke. Tick, 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 each second passing, each one reminding me of the years wasted chasing love, respect, belonging. Norman's words echoed again. You and the box are the same. There's something on the outside. But inside, there's nothing. Was he right? Was my life really just a hollow shell? I thought of my careful work restoring old clocks, of evenings lost in books, of the rare but warm talks I had with Alvin. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't flashy. But it was real. It was mine. Wasn't that enough? Maybe to Shirley and Norman. It wasn't. Maybe to them, I was a disappointment. But Catherine, she never measured love in trophies or bank accounts. She loved people for who they were. I looked up at her photo on the mantel. She was smiling, frozen in time, young, alive, glowing with a kindness the world seemed to have forgotten. What would you say, Catherine? I whispered into the silence. Would you take their side? But I knew she wouldn't. She had loved me for me. Not for what I earned, not for what I failed to become, but for the man I was. Then the doorbell rang. I blinked at the clock. Almost 10. Who could be here now? I moved toward the door quietly, not even turning on the hallway light. Through the frosted glass, I saw a familiar shape, Alvin, standing in his old coat. When I opened the door, he looked at me with gentle concern. I saw you pull in a while ago, he said softly. But the house was dark, so I thought I'd check in. I stepped back and let him in. Come on inside. We walked into the kitchen. I turned on the small light above the table, letting its soft glow settle between us. I reached for a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. Bad night? Alvin asked. Watching me pour. I nodded. There was no need to explain, he knew. But Alvin was never one to let silence cover a wound. What happened? He asked, gently but firmly. I took a slow sip of the drink, letting it burn down to my chest before I spoke. They gave me an empty box, I said quietly, and told me I was just as empty inside. And they said I was just as empty inside. I nodded, and my granddaughter filed the whole thing on her phone for her social media. Alvin's face darkened with anger. They had no right, he said. It's just cruel. I shrugged, feeling oddly calm after the shock I'd experienced. You know what the saddest part is? I said, looking into the whiskey glass. Part of me still hoped that this could be a real reconciliation, that Shirley really wanted to mend the relationship. Alvin shook his head. Some people just aren't capable of appreciating what they have until they lose it. I'm afraid Shirley never thought I had anything of value in me, I replied. We sat in the semi-darkness off kitchen, drinking whiskey and talking about the past, about children, about disappointments and hopes. Alvin didn't try to comfort me with empty words or tell me things would get better. He was just there, and that was no. Toward midnight he left, promising to stop by tomorrow. I was left alone in a quiet house filled with the ticking of clocks, the only witnesses to my lonely life. Before he went to bed, I looked at Catherine's picture again. I'm not empty, I told her, but just can't see what's inside. Sunday morning greeted me with a